Hello, and welcome back to another episode of This Round is on Me. Exactly 8 years ago, in September 2014, the government launched the Make in India initiative intended to reduce India's dependence on imports and encourage companies to develop, manufacture, and assemble products made in India, and to incentivize dedicated investments into manufacturing. But many decades prior to this, there were companies already doing this. In fact, exactly 100 years ago, one in particular pioneered the cement tiles industry in India as part of the Swadeshi Movement, as a contribution to India's economic independence by producing tiles of international quality to replace imports. This is Bharat Flooring and Tiles. And today I have as my guest the third generation of the family, Mr. Firdaus Variava, who is vice chairman of BFT, having taken over the reins of the company in 2002 from his mother. Firdaus, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Gauri.
So, as you know, I was born and brought up in Bombay, and without me realizing it, of course, BFT to me is actually synonymous with the city. And that's because I think most of the buildings I've ventured into, since my childhood, whether it was schools, clubs, and now government buildings, train stations, residential buildings, all have Bharat tiles. That's a pretty mean feat. And it's literally something that all of the city's landmarks have, and which is just testament to, BFT's iconic work. And also how it's changed over times, right? It's evolved over times. From the technology that the company introduced when it began to being pioneers of flooring styles through the years. Take us through how it happened that BFT literally became a part of every building of the city.
So actually, regarding the technology, it's actually the same. We've been doing the same thing for the last 100 years.
Wow.
We haven't changed anything. In fact, I think what sets us apart is that we, like other Bawa companies like K. Rustam and
Nothing's
Britannia
changed.
and others like that, I think we stand for basically doing the same old thing for forever and doing it as best as we can. So our process is basically inherently very manual, very artisanal, and the process that my grandfather brought down from Italy and Germany in 1920s, that's what we continue today. It's just that the scale of that has slightly increased now. I think we probably manufacture more than he ever did, but it's still using the same methodology.
But, how did it integrate itself into, the city so vastly to be in, from, like, I know all the Art Deco buildings on Marine Drive, Malabar Hill, the RBI to, I think, CST as well, to,
Yeah.
Dhanraj
True.
Mahal and Kolaba. So these are all sort of buildings that I've grown up going into, still continue to go into, the Yacht Club. It's literally everywhere, and you just feel like this sort of defines Bombay architecture in such a large way, and I'm sure, across the country, but I associated it with Bombay. How did it grow to become such an integral part of Bombay's architecture?
So basically, the way it started was that it was part of the freedom movement, and they wanted to become economically independent of imported materials.
Right.
So the whole ethos, including the name, was to talk about independence and talk about Bharat, which was like the name, for free India that was there. And when they started making the tiles, they were trying to make them as equal to the world's best so that they would replace the imports.
Right.
And in fact, the first thing that happened was that they got sued by a lot of British merchants saying that y'all are claiming y'all are making in India, but actually you're importing and then just putting an
No
Indian stamp on
way.
it.
Wow.
And the second thing that happened was that the British themselves adopted Bharat tiles because they realized that it's as good as anything they could import and cost like way less, because the imported tiles were typically around 4 times higher
Right.
back in those days because of the shipping and everything.
Sure.
So gradually, I would say Bharat Tiles started to become a part of a lot of new projects, and the whole ethos was that we want to ensure that the tiles last as long as the buildings. And the tiles are made out of the same material as the building. They're made out of cement. So they ended up becoming so enduring that nobody has ever removed them from the buildings. That's why you still walk on them.
Absolutely. And I'm going to come to sort of the whole restoration work that you do.
Yeah.
But that's so true. Like, these are buildings that have withstood time, and so have the
Yeah,
tiles.
so have the
And
tiles.
yeah.
And also, one of the things that happens is that a lot of the people who bought the tiles even back in those days, were end users.
Mhm.
So, as an end user, you have a very different mindset from somebody who's like basically selling a flat or a building. There, you don't care if the product lasts beyond a certain amount of time. It's like 5 years or something.
Right.
You don't care. After 5 years, you're not responsible. But if you're the end user, you definitely want to make sure that the flooring lasts forever, because you don't want to remove it.
Mm.
That's the one thing in any building or house you can never change easily. Right.
And that's
It's the most
something that
painful.
you guys work with the end consumer even till date, right? That's that's incredible. And it's funny that you say this, because I know that a lot of properties actually now command a premium when they
Mhm.
have this flooring, which is
Yeah.
incredible. So it's not just, it's almost something that increasing in value with
Yeah,
time because
true.
of the longevity of the product. And but when it comes to things like the design aspects which have evolved over time. I mean, I've seen floorings which have, of course, there's the beautiful floral style, and then you'll have the Art Deco style, and then you'll have the sort of, the Mondrian style
Mhm.
almost.
Yeah.
And of course, you've evolved it as well with terrazzo, which has become so popular. I've grown up with it in my parents' home,
really.
and then I always used to think that, oh, isn't this like, doesn't this look really cheap? And now I'm like, oh my god,
It's so
like worth
premium.
its weight in
Yeah,
gold.
true,
It's
true.
so. I mean, how did the sort of design aspect of it evolve over time to complement architectural sort of evolution as well?
So I think it's like one of the things that happen is that a lot of people have realized the value of the material, which is very versatile. And like if you look at terrazzo, for instance, you're talking about the fact terrazzo uses a lot of recycled materials. It's also very long lasting.
Mhm.
It's highly customizable. It's used for, like, most airports in the world use terrazzo. So it's a very hardy yet beautiful material.
Can you, for listeners who aren't familiar with terrazzo, can you explain what that is?
Basically, it's a composite of cement with stone chips.
Right.
And the stone comes from many sources. Like, terrazzo is very popular during wartime years, because when there was a lot of rubble,
Destruction.
destruction happened of old buildings. They used to basically crush up all the rubble and make it into terrazzo.
Mm.
And that actually fueled a lot of the, sort of restoration of old buildings after World War II. They used to just make them into floors. So apart from that, also the designs that we use, like a lot of the designs are timeless. They came from Italy and Germany in the 1920s, but we also have taken pains to make new designs, and that's, I'm talking about the patterned ones.
Yeah.
So those also, I was just showing someone that the patterned ones also have a very long life. They also last for 100 years because they are made of cement in the end.
Yeah, that's amazing. I understand that you didn't go straight into the family business after college, but worked in other fields before joining BFT. So, what was the reason for the detour? And was it not your obvious choice to start with?
So it was always my obvious choice, and I always wanted to join, but my mom was steadfastly against me joining. So she actually was trying to push me away. She said that, that this is not a, like, it was basically a dying business in the 1980s, and the business was really in a slump. There was not much happening, and she wasn't sure if she was have to, the family would shut it down, and they wanted to basically sell it off for the property. So,
Wow.
as someone who has a lot of ancestral property, that's actually more valuable sometimes than the business that
Sure.
resides in the property. So there was always a temptation from the family side, and it was a huge family by then. Like there was like some 100 people, all of whom were like, "When are we going to get some money? What's happening? Why are you guys wasting all this valuable property on this crappy business which doesn't produce anything?" Every year it used to lose like 10, 15 lakhs, and it used to make 10, 15 lakhs from warehousing. It was
So that
crazy.
seemed more lucrative. Yeah.
So they were like, okay, you know what? I mean, like this, at some point, they were just like, let's sell the business and we'll shut it. So that's when my mom stepped in. She said that, you know what, I'll just keep the business, the tile business. You guys sell the property, which is what they did. So everyone was happy. So they left the tile business to her. They said this is kind of worthless. And they sold off the property and they distributed the money amongst all of themselves. And from there, we had to kind of like start from scratch almost. Because the consciousness that had happened at that time was that a marble was very cool. Ceramic and vitrified tiles were suddenly very trendy. And, cement tiles were basically viewed as being like a archaic product.
Right.
And a lot of people who used to, when I sort of joined the business reluctantly, at my mother's behest, she said, give it a shot. See if it works. If it doesn't work, we can still shut it. But give it a shot. So when I used to go to architects and interior designers, most of them used to say, अरे ये तो पुराने ज़माने का टाइल है अभी क्या, and they used to sort of scoff at it.
Yeah.
And it was really only a few early adopters like Tejal Mathur and Ayaz Basrai and people like that who kind of saw the value in it.
Wow.
And they sort of started to bring it back slowly.
So, I mean, it's quite a legacy for you to have taken over. And of course, like you said, it went through its, lull period, and you've managed to revive it, and not just revive it, but grow the business in the last 20 years. So what were, other than the sort of perception of the product, what were, if any, challenges for you when you took over from your mother? Was it a pretty smooth transition? And is there anything, and I'm coming at this more for people who, are in a family business and, are taking over from the sort of previous generation. Was there anything for you that was challenging in that respect?
So one of the things that happened was that because we were, one of those companies that was still manufacturing this archaic product, so we did a hell of a lot of restoration works. So like Cathedral School, BMC headquarters, the Bhavdaji Art Museum, CST station. So we did a lot of restoration work, and my mother was very focused on that. So when I came in and I was like, but how do we keep it alive? We can't just depend on these restoration projects, and we need to look at also contemporary projects. So
Right.
there was this big difference in ideology. She was like, I don't want to drive away the restoration people. It shouldn't look too trendy and hip, because then they won't come and you'll be killing. And for me, it was like, but
the historic value.
Yeah, she was like, this it'll lose its historic value or something. And I was like, but those guys, they have nowhere else to go. I mean, we are going to do what we're going to do, and they would come to us because we do it the best. So let's try and develop new patterns, new stuff, make the showroom look modern, reach out to the younger generation, and there will be some amongst them who will appreciate it. And the best part was that the younger generation had forgotten all about cement tiles. So all the older generation were like, ye to purani cheez hai. The younger generation was like, wow, this is something new. We love it. And they wanted to start using it.
So, it's always that thing of you want to be different from what else is happening around you. And I guess if vitrified and, all of that ceramic was becoming almost common, you wanted to do something different. And, that's interesting. But is it fair to say that there isn't anyone else doing cement tiles then? Do you guys
No, there are, of course. There are. So there are a lot of people who do cement tiles, but it's just that they are not very... so there are people who are in different segments. So like there are, for instance, there's Royal Tiles. They're, I think, mostly export focused.
Right.
And then there are some people who are there in Gujarat. I think a lot of people actually now have switched over to export focused cement tiles, because we actually sell our tiles damn cheap in India. And the same tile, if you sell it abroad, costs 4 times more.
Wow.
So because of this huge price difference, and when you go to Europe or America, like the labor is so expensive that they just cannot afford to make it there. So they buy stuff from India. So actually one of the things that happened with us is that we have been domestic focused. It's not that other people aren't doing it. It's just that they aren't domestic focused.
Interesting. So, speaking of the product, right? And of course, you've talked about sort of the domestic versus export and the price difference, etc. But, even for me as a restaurateur, I often get asked that, look, your whole product offering is based on recipes. Can't anyone else just, copy the recipes and
Correct.
open a
Yeah.
similar restaurant? And, how do you sort of manage to stay, unique, right? And what's your USP? And I mean, I had the same question for you when it comes to tiles, right? At the end of the day, the materials are sort of common materials of cement and color or whatever it is that you'll use. How, and I'm probably sounding very ignorant here, but how do you sort of manage to stay different from your competition?
So I think the same way that you do, which is basically you have a certain philosophy. If I go to like a table or I go to any restaurant, I see, you have some philosophy which is at play in your business, which is like that you use the best ingredients, you have the top quality of service, like the guys I've seen there at, for instance, table, they've been there forever, and they always very humble, very like caring about the customer when they come in. They kind of like go out of their way to make you feel welcome. In spite of the fact that it's such a famous restaurant, right? They're still very sweet and caring about every single customer. And that's kind of like what drives us as well, is that like we try to inculcate the fact that, the customer has to get the best quality of ingredients in the tiles. And also, we try and give them the best quality service to whatever extent is possible for a small company like us. But everyone has that feeling that you have to keep the legacy alive.
Absolutely. But, you've talked about how it's an artisanal craft. They're handmade tiles, right? I mean, where does technology come into this?
So I think that the manufacturing process and the installation process are very labor intensive, and we can't really get away from that. We have tried to incorporate some elements of technology in the manufacturing process, but it's very tough because technology depends on mass production. And when we are doing like highly customized stuff, then, you can't really put in too much technology. You still need the manual element of the process. But where we bring in technologies in the design process, in the way that we deal with customers, social media, of course, is...
Absolutely. But tell me, I mean, when we talk about sort of handcrafted materials and products, there is this sort of aspect of it kind of going away with generations, because the younger generation wants to sort of work in a different sort of then the skilled labor is definitely something that's dwindling, and people want to kind of work in more sort of high flying jobs, etc. So is that a challenge that you face, and what are you doing to kind of continue that skill?
That's a really good question, because that's one thing we always struggle with. Is the cost of labor has been shooting up at a far greater pace than the cost of materials, actually. So one of the things that drives our price increases every year is the cost of labor. And the second thing is that we are constantly training new people, because as the older generation of artisans stop working, their children don't want to do it. So you're actually getting fresh people who have maybe been doing some other industry, and then pulling them into this one and then training them up. So like at the factory, for instance, we have it's a clearly defined promotion program where you start off at the lowest level. You kind of like just helping out, making the tiles, like bringing the materials, and then slowly you progress to being the actual person who makes the tiles. So it's like we have to do that in all aspects of our business to bring in fresh blood, because you're right, the old blood is like, dude, I don't want my kids to do this. बहुत मेहनत का काम है.
That's something we face actually in the restaurant industry as well, where may not be about not wanting to work in a kitchen or in the front of house, but wanting to go abroad maybe, and not necessarily sort of stick around here, where it's I guess, salaries are not as competitive and things, and that's a huge challenge. And one of the things, it sounds very similar to what we have to do, which is, we take people who are sort of really fresh off the boat, don't really have the
Yeah.
necessarily the skills, but just have the right attitude and are keen
Yeah.
to learn.
I think its attitude is the key.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
grooming them from sort of the ground up
Correct.
to what you want, and work their way up in the kitchen as well, or in the front of house. So it's interesting that it's we see this across the board. But
But I'm just going to interject here
Yeah.
that one of the strangest things that happened was my office boy in Bombay. He suddenly came and he said, "मुझे Delhi जाना है. I want to become a craftsman for applying your materials." And we were all like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best thing. That's like where I feel passionate about my. I mean, I've seen the he had interacted a lot with the guys who install the materials, and now he's like one of our installers.
wow,
So yeah, he totally transitioned from like office boy to material installer.
that happens a lot
And-
even in our business. People who start in, say, dishwashing,
Yeah,
they're in the kitchen, they're seeing everything, and eventually they're like, I want to have a hand at trying to, like, even if it's just chopping vegetables or whatever, and that's literally how they work their way up. And I think they are the sort of best people to have in your team,
Yeah.
because
because they've
they're-
actually chosen it.
yeah, and also that they're humble and sort of grounded enough to start from the basics. And honestly, once if you really work your way up, you're learning everything from scratch, literally. And I think that's sort of been the best thing for us. Rather than having to sort of make people forget what they've learned and do things your way.
True.
But do you have this issue that we have where, there's a lot of movement of people, turnover of people going to your competition, for example, and, is that something that concerns you ever?
So there are so as far as the installation goes, we actually don't have like lot of people on our payrolls. They're mostly people for hire. So those guys, if we don't keep them occupied, they're very clear that we will go and do anybody else's work. So, I mean, touch wood, we've been able to keep them occupied for a great deal of the time. And so they've kind of not gone anywhere else. But I know that if there was an ideal period and they're not earning anything from us, they would definitely work for someone else.
Yeah. I love by the way, I have to say, I love the first question in your FAQs when, you ask, you say, what is the magic element? Which FAQ starts with that? But I love that.
Yeah.
And, the answer is that they're 100% handcrafted and, really incorporate the concept of wabi-sabi in them.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So that's one of the things that, I mean, you were asking about competition, and the fact is that nowadays people don't want to spend the time to do handcrafted stuff because there are so many steps involved. So like, for instance, making the color takes about 4 hours, and then you have to take the color, mix it with water, press it into the mold, fill it into the mold, then you take it out from the mold, cure it in water, take it out. So there's like so many steps, and each of the steps has to be done as best as possible. It's literally like sushi. So the ingredients are so simple. Anybody could do it. But the thing is to do 7 steps, one after the other, each of which is manual. That's where the charm or the difficulty both come in. So because of the fact that we've been doing it for 100 years, so we have like certain systems and certain ways of doing it. But I know that for new players into this thing, it's incredibly difficult because everybody wants to do it, but it somehow becomes
a challenging
process. Yeah.
So, coming now to talk about the restoration projects that you've undertaken, like the Knesset Elayu synagogue in Kala Ghoda. Tell us about that process and how you're able to recreate colors and products to match, something that was possibly created decades prior. Right? So how do you go about that? And also from an installation perspective, because it's not like you're ripping out the entire floor and redoing it.
Yeah.
So how do you go about that process?
So that was actually the most interesting project for us because it was Abha Narayan Lamba was doing it, and she only wanted to, I think, change about 100 square feet or restore 100 square feet of the Minton tiles. And Minton tiles are not even cement; they're made out of clay.
Okay.
So These are like some 180-year-old clay tiles that we had to replicate using cement because we don't do clay. So I actually had a product designer who was working on it for about 6 months. And I
Wow.
think for him, it was his proudest, I mean, his name was Ashwin Malia. His proudest moment was the fact that he could recreate these clay tiles using cement. And he spent so much time on it. And
Wow.
finally, what happened was that when we installed the cement tiles next to the clay ones, you couldn't make out the difference.
Amazing.
It was a real, but I mean, all of us were like, I think we must have spent more than 3 times what we actually earned off that job because it was something that we just wanted to do. We were just
Yeah,
like,
but also you've created something
Yeah,
that
we just
probably
were like,
wasn't there, and
wasn't
that's
there.
what being pioneers is about, right? Is that you have to invest that time and effort
Yeah,
into
doing it.
into doing it, into the
Yeah.
R&D aspect of something like that. So the original tiles were not Bharat tiles.
The original tiles were Minton tiles, so they
Right.
were actually from England, and they were again made using a very painstaking process of basically making small pieces of clay, and then sticking those small pieces of clay together. So we had to like make small pieces of cement, make them
Wow.
match the same color and look antique, and then stick them all together and make the floor. So it was like, wow.
I know one of the projects that I think is wow, and it really, I mean, the floor, if anything, is what makes that impact when you enter, is at the Bhavdajilal Museum. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
that
yeah,
flooring is just
yeah.
outstanding, and I know that building went through a restoration as well when when it was being
True,
reopened.
true.
So tell us about that. Was that something that was there a lot of breakage and sort of redoing required, or was it a matter of repolishing? Like, how did that happen?
No, so there actually, even the Bhavdajilal Museum has mostly Minton floors and stone floors.
Okay.
But again, there I think what they did was they couldn't find either Minton or the stone to match, so they wanted something that would kind of match the age to some
Mm.
extent. Honestly, our tiles are much younger than the Bhavdajilal Museum floorings, but it was like the closest match they could find in terms of the material. So they kind of actually settled for our tiles, I would say, and it was like really nice. If you actually go inside the Bhavdajilal Museum and walk around, you'll see the old Minton floors, which are so beautiful.
Right.
But like I said, those are not in manufacture anymore, and even if they were, they would probably cost like, I don't know, I think like 2,000 or 3,000 rupees per square foot. So it's kind of
Wow.
unaffordable.
That's crazy.
Hmm.
So tell us, one of your most interesting projects, or client stories or requests that you've had, and take us through one of those.
So the strangest client request I've ever had was from a tobacco baron who came to me, and he was like, I want to do up my factory in the middle of some rural area of Telangana. So I was like, yeah, cool. I mean, and it looked like a really massive project. So he spent a lot of time choosing the tiles and everything, and then he demanded that I take him to Bombay Shirt Company, where he then proceeded to buy 20 shirts. And then never wore the shirts and never installed my tiles either.
What?
Yeah, I was like, this is the most befuddling thing. I said, okay, so I kind of kept in touch with him. I was like, did you install them? No.
You mean he bought the tiles, but he never installed them?
No, he never did. He bought a huge quantity of tiles, and then he never installed them. And he bought a huge quantity of shirts, and he never wore them. I was like, this guy has obviously got a lot of money.
Wow.
Yeah, he was like,
That must
he
be a
was
bit
like,
heartbreaking, though, right? I mean, it's not just about the sale. It's also about seeing it in come to fruition, right?
No, I just think I think he realized, because what happened was that like I said, his factory was in the middle of some really rural area, and he realized that if he had to take the tiles there and then install them, it would be another huge expense for him. So he just kind of like gave up on the idea, and he was happy. He'd come to Bombay. He had like a good time. He's like,
He had a shopping trip.
he had a shopping trip, and
You need more clients like
yeah,
this.
I need
right?
more clients
Yeah.
like this. It's like a really strange experience though.
But I've seen.
Oh, and then there was obviously a guy who rolled up with a suitcase
What?
of cash, both to my place and then to the Bombay Shirt Company. He made some call. Some guy rose up with a suitcase. Kana, here you go.
Can you send them our way as well to the restaurant? That is funny. What's next for you, Firdaus, in terms of BFT, and where's this going?
So actually, what you talked about earlier was the technology. We are actually now investing in technology at the factory level. So we are trying to mechanize more things and also expand the factory. So the old factory is right now kind of struggling because the whole trend has gone in our favor, where people are just buying like terrazzo and cement tiles and everything, and like we are actually kind of like really busting our guts to keep up with production.
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually investing in making a new factory and also mechanizing it to a greater extent.
But do you ever feel that mechanization might kind of impact what you guys are known for?
So the thing is that we want to mechanize like certain parts which can be like not the core, but like some parts which can be mechanized.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, material handling, right now it's again very manual. So the guys who we promote are the guys who do the material handling. They like carrying stuff from place to place.
Yeah.
It's very tedious. And those also form like almost like in the factory, they're almost like 60% of the workforce is basically spent in carrying things from place to place.
Wow.
So we need to basically mechanize that part. And we need to mechanize things like even loading a truck. Like right now, it's like guys carrying tiles on their backs and like putting it on the truck.
Yeah.
So like trying to get things. So a lot of that part
the unskilled part maybe.
Yeah, the unskilled part.
Yeah.
And that actually is the most time consuming. So we need to mechanize that part. And the core business of making tiles by hand will obviously continue.
And, are you still sort of, to a large extent a domestic business? Do you see yourself going international at some point?
Yeah, we are. So right now also we have started to work in Dubai, and we would be looking at other markets as well internationally. But I think the domestic market, honestly, look at India's growth story. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, dude, everything is here.
I know.
And
I agree. I mean, I think
it's
that's
crazy.
That's and that's in every sort of field, every industry. This is the place to be.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
So while other markets may maybe pay a little bit more or something, but the volume of projects is much less.
Right.
And here you have so much work going on in all the cities, and so I think that our growth is for the moment in India.
That's amazing. I actually want to go back and just talk a little bit about the second generation of your business. And
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm kind of going back and forth a little bit here, but it's amazing that, your grandfather passed the business down to your mother. That's not something that we see happen very often. And, I actually have this other show called Women on Top in India, and a lot of the conversations I have are about, women sort of entrepreneurs really struggling with working in a male-dominated industry or being taken seriously by family members, etc. And here your grandfather sort of handed over the reins to your mum. I think that's a really amazing story, and I believe she was the first IIM.
Yeah, she was in the first batch of IIM.
Wow.
She was, yeah.
Amazing. Tell us a little bit more about her and, her journey and how she sort of came to take over the business.
So actually, my grandfather, after he passed away, my grandmother took it over.
Wow.
For a bit. But she was already quite old by then. So then we had another relative who also took it over for some time. And he ran it for a number of years until this whole thing happened with the property.
Mm-hmm.
When everyone started screaming about let's sell everything and let's take the money and do what we want with it. Why should we be stuck with this? So that's when my mom actually stepped in. So she was like the one who said that I'll take it over because I feel like it can be kept alive, or it shouldn't be just,
keep the legacy.
Yeah, let's keep it alive as long as possible. And for her, it was very much a passion project. She was actually, I would say my mother does like 10 things at one time. So she was doing like wildlife conservation with BNHS. She also looks after her own properties, land. Then she ran Bharat Tiles. She was also dabbling in organic farming.
I feel like while you're saying all this, I'm like, Dia's going to be saying this in not so flattering a way in like 20 years from
Yeah,
now.
correct. You know how it is, like very dynamic, and so she kept Bharat Tiles alive as one of her things. Like she was like doing a lot of things, and then one of them was Bharat Tiles. So she had luckily the support of a lot of older employees who also did not want Bharat Tiles to shut.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, the average age of our employees in our company is like 30 years sometimes. I mean, you just feel
Wow.
like there are so many people who've been there for a long time, and so she had these guys backing her. So she kind of like just was like, let it run. And she also had good relationships with a lot of the heritage architects, like Vikas Dilavari, Abha Narayan Lamba,
Yeah.
and others. So that's how she kind of kept it going.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about the next generation for you? I know your kids are very young, but especially when you're talking about scale and things, I mean, is it something that you feel is important to, retain the family legacy, or do you see yourself kind of bringing in more professional management to really grow the business?
No, I think that professional management is required, because at the end of the day, like as an entrepreneur, you have to learn where to step aside, right? Like I'm one of those people who can maybe grow a business because, I'm a good hustler. I have good sales skills, but I'm terrible at organizing things. I have zero time management skills. Project management skills are pathetic. I'm not great at finance. So you need a guy, you need people, or actually a series of people who are professionals in that area where you are lacking. And I think as an entrepreneur or the owner, one would remain as like the sort of strategic or decision making.
The visionary, maybe.
Broadly you would see like this is the direction we have to go in, and then kind of define what people would do.
Yeah.
So that is actually one of the things that we are working on right now, is like setting in place the next level of management, and trying to find people who would kind of resonate with our philosophy and work in a professional setting.
How's that going? I know it's been a huge challenge for us.
Yeah,
so
it is very tough.
Yeah.
It's very tough. But that being said, I think what has made it tougher is the pandemic has suddenly, like the job market has gone nuts. Nobody's available to hire. And you end up hiring
they're
people,
available to hire at a very, very high
yeah, at a very,
premium.
very high price.
Yeah.
So that's been a big challenge, but it's happening slowly. So I think it's going to be a trend now.
Yeah. I think the important thing for me has been that, we're not in any rush, or there's no sort of, deadline by when we have to be at a certain scale in our business. And, we've really kind of taken it at our own pace, and it's important to find the right people rather than, to continue that legacy that you start building, and not sort of be pressured into it at any point.
Yeah, I think that's true. You have to kind of set the pace for your own thing, especially when you're providing a service. I think that's where our common ground is, that you're providing a service. It's an experience. So that has to be kind of like carefully nurtured. And
that's so interesting, because a lot of people, and even I think about that when initially I think of tiles and flooring, is that you think of the product, right?
Yeah.
And the product is only a very sort of one part of it, but it really is about the service that can distinguish you from the next guy making the same product.
Yep. So
Great.
I think that's one of the things. I think I was working with Britima for one of your projects, and we must have made around 20 or 30 samples for that. And that was the whole thing about giving the service and ensuring that she had a happy time with choosing materials for the project.
Unfortunately, the pandemic struck.
It was like really sad.
Yes. Okay, we're going to take a quick break before we enter the last segment of the show, which is all the fun non-work stuff. So stay tuned.
Sounds good.
Hello, everybody. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cock and Bull, Saida Sriram Nivedita and Abbas talk about a Bangalore surgeon beating traffic by running on the road, and Sriram's connection with Shankar Mahadevan. On Don Baika Kappa Aika, Avanti and Aparna give us their take on midlife crises and the desperation to try out new things and rediscovering lost passions. On Cyberpoint by Checkpoint, Shiladitya Mukhopadhyay talks to Prakash Bell. He is the head of security engineering team at Checkpoint Software Technologies. They discuss careers in cybersecurity and how to get started in them. On The Wire Talks, Siddharth Bhatia talks to Indian academic and political scientist Zoya Hassan about the current decline of the Congress party and its way forward. And on All Things Policy, Ananya Rao and Rohan Pai deliberate over the implications of releasing cheetahs bought from Africa into the Indian ecosystem. Once again, I would like to remind you all about our merch store. Go and check it out on the website ivmpodcast.com. There's a link for shop. Click on that, it'll take you to our store. Also, do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please do spread the word about the show. That really does help us. It helps all kinds of podcasts. And do remember to rate us or review us wherever you're listening to us or watching us. That could also be on YouTube. Remember, we have a number of channels on YouTube where you can go and check out our shows. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week: Volvo XC40 Recharge, Heads Up for Tails, HDFC Mutual Fund, and TransUnion Civil. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back, Firdaus. So I am now going to have my restaurateur cap on, or my your non-work cap on, and ask you a few rapid-fire questions. What's your go-to comfort food?
Definitely pork spare ribs.
Wow, that is very specific.
Very specific, yes.
Where do you get the best pork spare ribs?
I don't know, but my wife has the best sauce. She finds them,
Spill the
hunts
beans,
them
dude.
out. Or I cook them at home, actually.
Wow.
When
you
I'm
enjoy
really
cooking?
craving them, I buy the spare ribs from farm products
Yeah.
in Colaba, and then I make them at home.
Wow. Okay. We will put that down on your guest notes at the restaurant.
Yeah.
A great book you've read or podcast. You actually have your own podcast or had your own podcast.
I had one
What's
at
that
one
called?
time.
Tell us.
Oh God, I forgot now.
What? You're the worst salesman.
It was a long
Firdaus.
time back. Bhul gaya abhi.
Well, hopefully I won't be saying that about this one.
No.
But yeah, tell us any sort of good books, anything you recommend.
So right now I've been listening to a lot of this podcast called No Mercy, No Malice with a guy called Prof G.
Okay.
And I think he's like a NYU professor of marketing, an NYU Stern professor of marketing, and he's like vicious. So
Sounds like it from the name.
Yeah. So he's the guy who kind of ripped into Airbnb, not Airbnb, sorry, WeWork, when they wanted to go public. He was like, this is a rug pull. Everyone's getting scammed by the founders. He was one of those guys who broke the story.
Right.
But in general, he really talks about a lot of aspects of primarily American life, but also things like Bitcoin, virtual property, and politics. He hates Elon Musk, for instance.
Okay.
They have
Interesting.
Elon Musk has banned him from
Blocked
accessing
him on
Twitter. So he's one of those guys who's a little controversial, but he's really insightful as far as a lot of world events go.
So what? No Mercy, No Malice.
No Mercy, No Malice by
Okay.
Prof G.
Gonna check that out. What's the best investment you've made in your journey?
So I think one of the best investments has been in people. One of the things we always do is that we end up paying as best as possible for the people we want to retain. And so that has been a double-edged sword in a way, because you end up overpaying sometimes, but at the same time, you also have a lot of continuity as far as people are concerned.
Yeah.
So like I told you, the guys have been around, for instance, my marketing manager has been there for 15 years now.
Wow.
My factory manager before he retired was there for, I think, 30 years. My CEO has been there for 30 years.
Amazing. But it's
So it's
true,
good.
I mean, we're actually in a people's business, right? Like a
Yeah.
service industry is about people, and I think that makes so much sense to invest in your people. It's true. Who've been your role models or mentors along your journey?
So I think that if I talk about design, so for instance, Ayaz has been one of my role models or mentors, Tejal Mathur, Sara Sham. So they've always taught me something about design and how the design world operates. As far as business has been concerned, I had a mentor called Pradeep Chanda, who's a marketing guru for a number of years. Then, for instance, Baman Irani, the builder, Rustamji Builders, he was my mentor for a while, and he was like really helpful in telling me that, look, I mean, don't be disappointed with the lows, because as long as you know where you're going, even if there's a dip in the road, you will eventually reach that point. So
it might just take a little longer.
Yeah, he's just like, the dips come, but just keep going towards your goal and you'll eventually reach there.
So true. Your definition of success.
That's a good one. I think that's something which I've always struggled with, because on the one hand, everyone talks about scale and, we need to grow and become huge, and valuations, and this whole startup culture seems to infect everyone, including me. Sometimes I'm like, I need to grow to like 1,000 crore valuation, and then I'll just sell everything and retire. But I think my definition of success is basically that you have to find that ikigai, which is your passion, which for me is design and making, creating things. I'm a creative person by nature, so like the creative aspect. And if I make a little bit of money on the side from that, then I'm happy.
That sounds absolutely fair. Listen, Firdaus, thank you so much for being on the show, and I wish you the very best to reaching your 1,000 crore valuation at some
Thank you
point,
so much.
and being happy along the way as
Yeah.
well. So, but thank you for making the time today.
Thanks so much.